forms of art that are mostly unknown in the diaspora or kind of like on display or in performance, where we're interested in having people participate and learn how to actually do these crafts and these artworks.
Hi everyone, good morning. My name is Rafael Zaida. I'm coming from Mississauga. We have an organization called the Canadian Arabic Orchestra. We call it the orchestra because we wanted people to imagine the structure, but in fact the organization runs different programs. Orchestra. So it's a charitable organization that registered in 2015. Me and my wife, she's a pianist. We came from Jerusalem, where we used to be teachers, music directors, and the National Conservatory of Music there. When I first landed in 2013, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where to go. I felt like that's not right. Working in that field, being a performer, engaged in the music life for almost 15 years back then, it doesn't work that you don't know what to do here. With the fact that my wife was born here, raised her first year age, and then I went back to Jordan. And then I said, we have to do something. We have to create a platform for new people who are coming here so they can find their path and their way. And that's where we started the Canadian Arabic Orchestra. We have a pool of 55 musicians, 20 choir members. Most of them, 50% of them are Arabs, and the rest are from different nationalities. And the core reason of having this organization is to build bridges between Arab culture and non-Arab culture, especially that we have that stereotype image about Arabs that they have only fighting, and the newspaper and media always present us as terrorists, which is not fair, because we have 1,400 years of culture contribution to humanity, with science, with music, with art, with everything. And we said, you know what, we have to do something about it. And the orchestra now runs 3 main programs: the Festival of Musical Arts, where we bring musicians from Arab or community and get our musicians to interact with them and work with them. We do 14 concerts, different concerts from different regions of the Arab world. We do a summer festival called Multicultural Folk Celebration. We bring folk groups from different backgrounds, Danish, Spain, Arabs, Latino, from everywhere to perform on one stage during the summer around the 27th of June. We have another program called the Local Concert Series in Mississauga. We don't have the luxury of activities that you have here in Toronto, so we said, we need to create an avenue for people to plan their month so they can find something to do. And we run the Local Concert Series since August now. On the side, we also started the Canadian Arabic Conservatory of Music. So I'm taking a lot, but I'm really excited about talking about what we do. The Canadian Arabic Conservatory of Music is also an initiative to get the new generation to come involved with the music, and we teach them to play Western, but on a focus on Arabic instruments, in particular like la'oud and qanoon and percussion and so on. And we have formed now the Canadian Arabic Youth Orchestra, which is formed from young students who are really amazing and doing a great job. And we wanted them to be proud of their culture. And we think to be able to contribute to the community here, you have to feel belonging, right? And if you miss that connection with your own culture, you will not be able to get. And that's why we have the orchestra. We are proud of what we're doing. We have another program that we run also around Canada-wide, because also we felt like our community in other provinces, they feel they need the same need that we have here. So we decided to do a tour. We run it in 2019, 2020. We started part of it, but due to COVID, was half of it was in April 2020, where the hit COVID. So we postponed it, and now we have another round called for New Music. We get to go round in March. 2022. So glad to be with you here, and I'm sorry if I take time, but I'm really excited about this and to get people to know about it.
You actually answered a lot of what this discussion's about.
I'm sorry.
So we're done. Bye. But no, I would love to explore with the rest of the panelists as well that, you mentioned that there was a need that you were filling in terms of, having Arabic music represented. There was a lack of that, especially in Mississauga. I'm wondering down the line here, what was that need that through your programming that you wanted to start off with, and perhaps how it's changed a little bit? What was great in terms of telling us that other musicians were coming in, and they're representing other cultures as well. Perhaps what
Sure, yeah, and similarly, well, for us it really started with wanting to learn how we wanted to learn singing. So it's like very specific, and we looked around, like a few of us were really just captivated by this music, and there was nothing happening. There was nobody we could learn from. We didn't actually know if there was anybody in America that was teaching or like even versed in this tradition. So that's how it started for us, and then that, I guess, interest in learning older forms or unknown forms of our own culture that we didn't know about led to other things, rituals, ceremony, dance, traditional village dance from Eastern Europe, which actually nobody here was doing or knew about. There's just the Ukrainian performance on stage. Everybody knows that. It's very iconic. So there wasn't this opportunity for this kind of participatory culture for us. And then the people around us who knew even less. Like we even knew about some of it and we knew where to look. But as we started to investigate, we realized that a lot of people didn't know anything about this. We wanted to share. So we started inviting instructors that we found here and there. As you know, as we make connections, learn more about the community and have an idea of what's out there. So we started inviting artists from the States, and then made connections with artists in Ukraine who were in Poland and other places who were able to come and teach us, and then through that sort of a lot, kind of a big way, but we're feeling that need that now to continue to go on with it.
So there are two main reasons why we decided to start House. The first was that in North America there's a lot of there's like certain representation of South Asian music. There's a lot of classical representation with organizations like Ragmala, even with the Aga Khan Museum, even Small World. There's a lot of classical representation. And then the other is that really popular kind of like Bollywood music representation, which is more mainstream in culture. What we wanted to focus on specifically was really looking at independent younger artists who were living in both urban and rural centers around the world, and the music that they create. There's a very, very rich tapestry of South Asian artists from across the subcontinent who basically create this music. They create, and it's like any and every genre. So basically, we were very tired of this like world music label, where we were like, this is a very overly generalized, super kind of like Western label that's been put on all music that's not kind of considered to be North American. But we have artists in South Asia who are working across all these different genres. If you want to look at metal, if you want to look at electronic dance music, if you want to look at just like indie, soft pop, like there's musicians from everywhere. So we basically wanted to represent those musicians and bring them here. And then as time passed, we decided to kind of expand out from just South Asia, and we started focusing on Southwest Asia, North Africa, and then just a general kind of like region where we were bringing a lot of musicians out and basically throwing parties for people here, where we would like, there's a need, like people are excited about it, and we can throw these parties, so why not do it, basically. The second reason we started it is because I've basically been working in the arts for about 5 or so years. And I started working in the arts when I was, I think, like maybe 19 or 20. And by the time I reached this stage where I was like, I have performing arts experience, I have management experience, but I was applying for positions and there was all this massive gatekeeping within the community where it was like, you don't have enough experience to be reaching these kind of middle and senior level positions, but no one's really expanding out to include younger curators, younger programmers, and programmers of color. And so I was like, okay, if no one will hire me to do this, I'll just do it myself. I'll make a space where I can then work with other people who also want to program music. And so we do a lot of collaborations with a bunch of different independent collectives across Canada, across Toronto, where we're like, yeah, like if there's no formalized space, we will reclaim other spaces, we will take up other spaces, and we felt like it was really necessary to do that. While we did it, we actually became really popular with a lot of like younger queer audiences as well, where they felt like it was a much safer space to be, because we were very clear about not like who wasn't welcome, but who was welcome and who we wanted to expand the space towards. And so while doing that, it just made it a very inclusive, very exciting place to be. Pre-pandemic, we were doing maybe 8 to 10 showcases a year, and we found that steadily we just like it's not that our audiences were only South Asian, because again the music wasn't like in a particular language or a specific genre. It was just, what are you interested in? What is the music you're interested in? And we'd connect our artists who were coming from internationally with local musicians who were doing similar stuff here. So we ended up with just a much larger audience. We ended up with just a lot of expansion and just kind of like a very specific niche that was also just very open. So yeah, that's how we ended up starting.
Well, you touched on a few things that I would really like to come back on as well, but Isha, please tell us about programming here at Rome. How that's kind of started and changed perhaps.
Okay, well, I think we are a little bit different than the Canadian Free in the sense that, unfortunately, we started here for capitalistic reasons. You guys are all non-for-profit. We are clearly for a profit organization, but with the prices and everything, the goal was never to make a killing. The goal was to just make a living and make sure that there's a space for people to feel a little bit better about the universe altogether. Originally, the goal was to, well, there were 2 goals as well. The first one was to open an Eastern European place downtown Toronto, because for the most part, if you want to try something authentic from the Slavic world, you either have to travel to Mississauga, or you gotta go up north, or you gotta go to Scarborough. But downtown, there are still people from that part of the world who live here and want to drink and eat, and they didn't really have the space. So that was the idea number 1, is for this specific group to have home. And the reason number 2, which within the first 2 weeks of us being open became the most important reason, was that because of our music programmer, Tanguy Lopa. He's a fearless leader of Mosquito Bar. He's one of the people who started Fedora Upside Down, one of the people who started Lemon Bucket Orchestra, and one of the people who makes Toronto to feel like a massive community for all the musicians. He showed us that specifically musicians in the city are so underappreciated by other music venues, by people, that musicians quite often switch their professions, move on, simply because they think that they just don't matter in this world whatsoever. So since the first year of us being open, we just wanted to show to everyone that everyone is terribly wrong, that life would be a lot worse without live music and without musicians. And we most definitely wanted to show to artists themselves that what you do really fucking matters. What you do is important to everyone. And So that's how we got to where we are right now. It was to show the importance of music to people, not just to consider that artists is just like an elevator background, or not just consider that their job is, learn 6, 7 chords and that's it, but it's thousands of hours of doing what they're doing, and somehow it makes everyone's life a little bit better. People just don't notice it, so we wanted people to notice it.
So you both mentioned something that, in terms of space, taking up space and, in exploring new spaces as well with your programming. So, of course, Wafa, you with the Canadian Arabic Orchestra, in Mississauga. You mentioned earlier, you're like, we don't want them to go to Toronto. We want them to stay here because we want to create this space and whatnot. So, I don't know, with either of your, any of your organizations and initiatives, have you noticed that where you are located makes a difference in terms of your programming, and perhaps have you changed where those spaces are? And how has that changed your audience?
That as well. Similarly, we wanted to have a gathering place in downtown Toronto because that's where all of us were living, and that's where we felt the good energy, this vibe, this community that had similar values. And yeah, the Eastern European, immigrants move up and they go to the suburbs, and everybody's out in Mississauga or wherever North York. And that's great, but those kind of places don't have any gathering places, and they're not spaces that are welcoming. They're commuter suburbs, right? So don't physically meet, and these kind of interactions don't happen. So we wanted to also stay here, and so we were trying to host events at venues that have still remained downtown, I guess. There's a lot of churches that are here, but there's nobody connected to them in the spaces. The Vladimir Institute, which is at Spadina and Harvard. So we were kind of trying to do a similar thing to reinvigorate spaces that were kind of not dying, but there weren't young people and fresh ideas happening there. So that's part of what we were doing as spaces as well.
For us specifically with spaces, we didn't just want to, I kept hearing these stories about how Toronto in the 90s used to be this really cool space for music, where you could just walk into a warehouse and every floor was a different party and everybody was having a great time. And then all of these spaces slowly started shutting down and making way for condos and commercial spaces and commercially live music. So when we started doing presentations, we basically wanted to take over spaces that were very traditionally used by specific audiences. So we'd go into places like Hughes Room Live, we'd go into the Aga Khan Museum, we did some shows at 988 Bathurst, we did shows just in random warehouses where we would sneak in and do showcases. Where we were basically we're here to stay, we're here to present music that you may not have heard before, but it's still, it's still viable music, it's still music that deserves to be listened to. And we're going to bring our audiences into the space so that they can check it out and they can kind of take over as well. Because sometimes, most places were really excited to have us, but some places were oh, cool, here's our token brown people are going to come in and we're going to basically bring in a new audience into our very predominantly older, Caucasian, male-dominated genres of music. And we'd just be well, no, we're not here to help you with your development. We're here because we're here to expand and showcase our artists and the musicians and community who want to listen to them. So we basically did stuff. Mostly across downtown area, just because it's still sort of easier to find smaller to middle-sized spaces here, but it's definitely, in terms of space, has always been a challenge. Places like 54 Lansdowne have been massively helpful for us, because those were spaces that were you can come in, you can use the space. We're not going to ask you to pay a bunch of money to be here. And especially as like a not-for-profit collective that's recently been starting up, finding spaces that weren't super expensive or had like really absurd kind of like deals with presenters where they'd expect us to pay a fair amount of money and then take our ticket sales and then also keep our, where we'd be like, we just want to pay our artists.
If we can't afford to pay our artists by being in this space, the space is then not for art. So it's been a struggle to find space for sure. That's what I'd say.
And that's an interesting question when it comes to, let's say, funding,
Yeah.
right? And finding our funding in order to continue our initiatives. So does that mean that any of you have had to partner with other organizations in order to find that funding?
Constantly.
That kind of
Constantly.
thing?
Yeah.
So I don't know, Wafa, if you have, want to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, you have the same issue exactly because I think most of them, the funding agencies' mandate is to create that spirit of collaboration. We did a bunch of them, for example, with Agapan, with the Toronto Arts Community Center, the Living Arts Center itself. So yes, we have to do such collaborations because it brings back to us as well because we want to work with other organizations and we want to learn from their experience. Especially they have their own audience, not only mine, right? So to be able to reach the wider range of folks, then you have to start this kind of collaboration as well. So we do have that, and I want to add to the struggle with the venues. For us, because some of our programming is, need to be in a certain structure and certain look. So we have to go with a very expensive venue, like going to the Living Arts Center, for example. You have to pay around one of the main shows that we have in the festival. We pay $21,000 just for the venue.
Wow.
And you have to do it twice during that festival. It's very expensive, and our relationship with those venues mostly is dry. If they have a charity rate, and that's the maximum that they can do, but you have to pay. And you can imagine how much money you have to bring in order to make the event affordable for audience. Because if you're talking about the presentation of art, you can't be commercial. You can't charge them like $100 for a ticket and expect like to bring 1,400 people to come and attend. So we try to minimize our ticket costs so it makes it more accessible for audience. Sometimes we go with the smaller venues. And I want to clarify a thing that yes, we are based in Mississauga, but most of our concerts are around the GTA. We have concerts in Toronto, we have concerts in North York, and Oakville. We have upcoming concert in Hamilton. So we try to reach the audience where they are. And even in Mississauga, we don't have one specific venue that we work with the fact that we have a very big shortage in venues in Mississauga with a monopoly, right? You go to the venue and ask for a reservation and say, you know what, the music school or music dance, they reserve the whole 2 months in February and March. So what happens? We can't do anything with that because there's only the Living Arts Center, another 2 small venues that some of them, they don't fit the audience that we want. So we started a discussion with the city to propose a new building actually, because we said, if nobody is hiring us, we will do it ourselves. So we said, you know what, let's start that initiative and try to find out a way to build a building with 3 big theaters that can accommodate that need in the city. And we are in the process. We got a funding for the study from Canada Community Foundation. They gave us $70,000 to start the study, and we did it. And it showed the need that there is a very big shortage in Mississauga in particular in theaters capacity and seats.
Yeah, I'm going to add to that as well in terms of venues and funding. Because the majority of our artists we have artists who are based in Canada, but we have a lot of artists who are based in the subcontinent or internationally. And for smaller venues, a lot of the time the struggle is actually that they're like, can you tell us when your artist has last been in Toronto and what their Toronto audience like what is their audience draw? Which is a very fair question for a venue because they obviously want to maximize the profits for the night. But for our artists who are very independent, new artists in a lot of ways, haven't played a lot in Canada before, maybe touring here for the first time, it shuts down more than half the venue and locations that we could potentially be looking at. Because they're like, well, if you've never toured in Canada before, we don't know if we're going to make, like it's a Friday night, you know, this is our busiest night. Why should we give you our space? Why should we do this with you? So, and the same goes for funding, where we're working with artists who are very new, who are very young, independent, have maybe have very extensive careers outside of Canada, but don't here. And so what ends up happening is that even with funding, they're like, well, you know, like you're not an Ontario-based, you know, these aren't Ontario-based musicians or Toronto-based musicians. So we're just automatically not eligible for a lot of funding opportunities as well. So we end up doing a lot of collaborations, sometimes out of necessity. Often we'll still collaborate with artists who meet genre-wise and like, you know, vibe-wise with our musicians we're bringing in. But it is a necessity for us to collaborate because if we don't work with local artists, which we want to anyway, but if we didn't, we wouldn't actually get any spaces or any funding.
And do you find the same struggles as well? Sorry, read the rest of me.
No, yeah, you go.
No, go ahead.
I can't really add much to this because again, we are for profit, so we can't really collaborate with anyone because we're not ever going to get the funding. Our collaboration is humans who come in and buy a pint of beer, and therefore we are able to do what we do. Our collaboration is like, you know, us standing outside with 3 pairs of pants and 3 sweaters during winter and sell mulled wine to go from 11 a.m. until 11 p.m. Fuck, that was, anyways. So that's how we collaborate. I just wanted to add on what you said is that you said that it's fair for a music venue to look at what the audience, you know, the specific musician is bringing in, and because they want to maximize their profits. I kind of agree with that, but I kind of really don't because I think it has to. I think if people trust the venue and if people trust that the venue is bringing good music and like, you know, you don't have to look at what is happening in Toronto at the moment. A programmer can just look at, you know, a YouTube video or like listen to something and be like, that's fucking cool, yeah, let's do that. I think that's how it should be working instead of if people are hunting for money, then for the most part people are kind of losing. If you're hunting for, you know, a good experience and keeping the crowd, then that's a bit of a different story because that's how you build it up. If you go to a bar and sit down and you order a shot and it ends up costing $40 and you know a bar owner is going to be all about, oh well, at least I made a profit of this one specific item, but you're never going to go back to that bar. What's the point of doing that? So I think this is kind of an okay mentality for music venues, but also super wrong.
I mean, I think it's super wrong, but I understand that like they want to make a profit, right? Like it is, you have to pay your rent.
Making a profit at the moment is completely different than making sure that people keep on coming back. Yeah. Half of our people here, whenever they come, no one knows what's going on. Nobody knows about the programming. Nobody knows like who's going to be playing. Like whenever we have a host at the door, everybody's always asking like who's playing tonight, and it's of course a part of it is because we don't always upload stuff on Instagram. We suck at that. I'm very sorry, but the second half is because people just trust. People trust that they're going to come in and there's going to be a wonderful experience happening. So I think that's how.
And I can add to that is what's happening with the Living Arts Center in particular. And I mentioned to you, Mercedes, that the city they get back the building from the organization that was running it because they were they did cultural stuff, but their most focus was on maximizing their profit because maybe they wanna pay the bills, but the city was not happy and they saw that there is a need for cultural events to be in the building. So that's why they said, you know what, we'll take the building back and we'll run it ourselves.
I'm wondering with the climate that's out right now, that especially during this pandemic, a lot of EDI discussions, equity, diversity, inclusion discussions have come out. And do you find that your maybe pitch or your sell to venues or to grants that language has changed? Has it remained the same? Has it gone back to your original initiative, saying this is how we're being representative? I give you an example. So for Sunfest, you know, we typically are the only ones in London that are presenting any kind of culturally diverse, you know, programming in London, Ontario. And so I feel like we were expanding out, and then originally we have to kind of remind people, this is what we started out with. We were doing this before any other organization was saying, hey, we changed our board, now there's brown people on it, you know? Or those are the barriers that we were just constantly trying to do for the past 27 years and break down. And so therefore, now we're going back to that pitch, essentially saying, this is what we were doing originally, and that's what we're gonna keep on doing. Have you found that your, let's say pitch, but like, that's maybe the wrong word, but essentially your messaging has changed over this period at all? Or just has it evolved, or has it gone back, stayed the same? Which ended?
I'm not sure that our messaging has changed, but I mean, it's a really good point you bring up. I mean, it's very much alive in our conversations and in everything that we do. Like, that's part of our consciousness, I think. It's kind of interesting, like being white people and representing like our European heritage, which is not Western European, and which is for us has always been a very different thing growing up in Canada. But on the surface, when it's, you know, it's all relative, right? So it's definitely been a question for us, like including Indigenous cultures that are local to the places that we are holding our events. At the same time, we're like, remembering, I think we've been kind of going back recently, like, oh yeah, remember, we're actually about representing Eastern European culture, because all of a sudden we want to meet all these needs, and there's a big urge within us for social justice, and we see a lot of the areas that need work in the world, and we see the power of what we've built, right, the community that we have, and I guess the momentum behind a lot of our initiatives. We see how we could galvanize people to a lot of things, but we've also spread ourselves thin some of the time, so we are I think trying to like refocus. We had our camp, and then we did lots and lots and lots and lots of events, and we always have ideas for other projects, so now we're kind of coming back to like, okay, let's just make sure that we bring in really good programming and good people for this camp, and make sure that this is solid, and that that we don't forget that we really want to have that core of Ukrainian and Eastern European, you know, in all its diversity, not just Slavic, because that's also something that we talk about, not just Slavic culture, which is sometimes how it's framed, but, you know, to include all those subtle parts of our identities and people who are from that part of the world. So, yeah, all that to say, like, I don't know if we've done that, but you can't not be aware of that right now, I think, if you're involved in community and culture building. So it's very important, and one of the things we've kind of come up against or we've struggled with in our work is not sometimes like being enough of something. Like we often say, like, well, we're not Ukrainian enough for the Ukrainian organizations to support us, or for people from the diaspora to like understand what we're doing, but then like we're not really like diverse enough for the Canadian funders and the government funding, you know, that's looking for more diversity or whatever. I don't know. So it's funny, we're kind of in this funny spot a lot of the time. But we're just actually trying to do something awesome and fun, right? Like just whatever we think is good quality, and is really, the music is quality, the dance, the experience for people. And we don't want to have those limitations always of, you know, trying to check some boxes. It's like, let's just do what we know is like from the heart and is good, and is meeting the need of people like us that are not finding their needs met in other places. Yeah. So.
Do you find, any of you here, that that's the same thing, that it's kind of reminding yourselves of what it is that you set out to do and how that's changed? So you mentioned, for example, Canadian Arabic Orchestra, that it's 55% Arabic, and the rest it's about bringing new people on. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, as I mentioned, the main goal is for the orchestra is to build those bridges between different cultures. And one aspect of it is to bring people to know about us, not only to listen to us, to work with us, and to know more in depth about Arabic music and the culture itself. So that's why when we started the initiative from day one, we were inviting musicians from other cultures to come and join us. And we were actually amazed by the reaction of those musicians who liked the sound of the music and to learn more about the history and the theory of it, because there's a lot of differences between their culture and our culture, maybe the Western classical music and the Arabic classical music. And we felt like they blend inside the group, and we built to that the personal relationship. They became friends, and they go together. They work on other gigs, on other with other groups together, and that was a big success for us, because like somebody like Majd Sukar, for example, he was in touch with us from before he comes to Canada. And when he landed 10 days, he came and was on stage with us. And he was able to fast approach other musicians through the connections that he built inside the group. And suddenly he's everywhere. He does concerts with everybody, Monica, other groups, and Aga Khan. So we are happy that we were that bridge that brought him to explore that part of the music scene in Toronto in particular. Our message did not change, or our approach the same. Every single time we run a program, we sit and examine against the main goals and reasons that we started this initiative. And if it does not serve, we say, no, we are not going to do it. Recently, we have been invited to participate in a documentary movie. And the documentary movie was talking about different cultures, right? And they said, you know what, we want to showcase the Arab part of it. And when we read the script, it was talking about, a very political position in the script itself. And then the board looked at it and said, you know what, this is not what we are looking at. We are bringing people to know about Arab in general. We don't want to engage in political discussions, because we will never end up. People will have different opinions, and this is not our role, So we decided not to participate. Even we got pressure from our community itself, because we have the Iraqis, we have the Lebanese, we have the Syrians, we have the Egyptians, and everybody, they have their own conflict inside their country, and they want to reflect that in their relationship or in their work or whatever. So we always stay away from these discussions, and we just target the artistic part of our identity, and that's what we want to do.
And I just want to go back to one thing. We'll probably wrap up soon, but one thing that Virginia said was that, and I find that this is kind of maybe common amongst all of our organizations, is that we're collaborating, we're excited to do that, we're excited to do cool shit, but are we spreading ourselves too thin? And how are we preventing burnout within our organizations? Because
that's all I could think of when you were talking.
I don't understand.
And I'm sure a lot of people in this room can relate to that as well, right? Especially with the pandemic and being able to just meet with anybody over Zoom. And it's like meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting. And collaborations, which is great, we should all be collaborating. But are we doing too much? Should we bring it back down a little bit?
It's hard when you see so much need for more cultural programming. It's so hard. Like, it's just like, oh, I wish someone would just do this. Like what you were saying, right? So, I mean, but
it's unfortunately every single day I wake up with the thought that we're just not doing enough. I need more people. I need to hire more staff. Fuck, this hasn't been done yet. It's the thing about Toronto and why I deeply fell in love with it is because it is this huge city where you've got majority of the people who, in the most wonderful and pleasant way, do not care what someone else is doing. You know what I mean? Not in a bad way, but in like, I'm doing my thing, you're doing your thing, we're great together. Let's not just survive, but let's live right next to each other. It's so glorious and so beautiful, because back home, everybody's going to be judging you. Everybody's going to be saying like, no, you should be doing this, you should be doing that. Everybody's trying to tell you how to like live your life and tell you that you actually know you need to be doing what I'm doing. And here it's just, I don't want to say it's like an equilibrium, but it's a pretty cool place. And
well, and that does happen in the diaspora community here in Toronto, right? So it's still happening. That old country stuff is, but that's why we've expanded and we've had to expand outside of the diaspora, right?
People tell us all the time that our borscht has to be with meat, whatever. Get over it, it's fine. So, and I feel like that's one of the things that probably attract people from all over the world and from all over Canada to live in Toronto. So it's the city of immigrants. It's the city where the most amount of languages in the world are spoken. And it's beautiful, but at the same time, I think that it's the city of many, many, many lonely people, because you left your family, you left your community for something you think better and hopefully is going to be better, but it's just filled with individuals who just want to belong somewhere. It's filled with individuals who just want to feel like they're at home, and it's not necessarily always connected to their own culture. It's about the general feeling of like, being right next to another human being and not, them smiling to your face and then judging you behind your back, but it's about genuinely like, building relationships, not the entirety of King Street West. I hate this street so much, but the actual places that make people belong. It doesn't matter where you come from. It's all about feeling nice to one another. Many people that come from second and third world countries, I feel like they know it so much better because we have much deeper connections to our family and much deeper connections to like people that we grow up with when we move out. Right. People in the first world country, I think they have it, but not really. From what I've noticed about Canadians and North Americans altogether, you go to Thanksgiving or you go to Christmas, not because you really want to, but because, oh fuck, I guess it's time to go see my family kind of a thing. It's a bit of a different approach to life.
Like a duty, right?
Yeah, it's a duty, yeah. It's a job. Like your family's becoming your job. And I mean, sure, I get it, I guess, but I really don't. And so I think that's why what you guys are doing is phenomenally important, and I think what we are trying to do over here works because that's the vibe that we're trying to provide. It's just, you're not going to get judged. Just be yourself. You're weird, cool. You're not weird, also cool. You just do your thing.
Yeah, like one of the the best feedback I ever got from a Taos show was this person came up to me and was like, usually when I go to a show, I go in, I interact with the music because I'm like, oh, this is cool, and then I leave. But coming to our shows, she's like, this is the first time I've ever actually wanted to just go outside and talk to people and just interact with people. And I felt like, even though like I know that I might not know who this musician is, I might have never heard of them, but I know that because you're bringing them, they're probably a great musician, and that there'll be a certain kind of person who's there who helps to make you feel like you belong. And you can just kind of be in a corner dancing by yourself, or like talking to people, or interacting with the musicians, or like often after shows I end up with like 20 people in my apartment drinking tea. And I'm like, yeah, no worries, come, like join, like my door is always open, Taos is always open to everyone. And it's because like when I moved, when my team moved, there was a lot of isolation, there was a lot of feeling of kind of stepping away from this collective into a very like individualistic space, and we wanted to make a space that wasn't so individualistic, that allowed you to connect with other people however you want to. It hasn't, I mean, and that's why when I, like, during the pandemic or even otherwise, I'm constantly like, how can I continue to create this space even if we can't actually meet each other, even if we can't be in a physical space? And that is a huge struggle, trying to figure that out.
And I think we have to wrap up soon, but I have one more question. What's an event, organization, or person that inspires you to keep not only doing your work, but just inspires you that we're continuing with our good work, that we're continuing to reach out to communities? Is there an organization or a person or event
This place. But like really, right? This place, the community that started, that keeps it going, Lemon Bucket folks, the Fedora folks. But for me, for our camp, a big inspiration has been a lot of the folks in the U.S. in the Balkan music scene and the Eastern European music scene in New York. So the Eastern European Folklife Center, long name, and they run Balkan Camp and also Ashkenaz Foundation and the camp, Claus Canada. Some of our folks have gone to that. So those are kind of what we look to. But yeah, absolutely what's going on here. It's like huge inspiration.
For me, would be, I'd say, daytimers in the UK, and then No Nazar LA, of course, in LA. But also just generally the UK independent South Asian music scene is super cool. Like they, on a weekly basis, constantly do showcases. They do boiler room shows. They like took over the BBC one in South Asia. Like it's been really, really cool seeing that representation in that community. And if we can get anywhere close to that, it's amazing.
For me, I see a lot of good organizations do a really amazing work here, and we try to look at their model and get inspired of what they do. But it was easier for me because I worked with the National Conservatory in Jerusalem, and I was very proud to be part of what they do. So I felt inspired of what they do every single time in the year, because they have similar programming, but definitely because the community is basically Arabs there, so they don't have that struggle to go beyond their their work. You just have a concert and you advertise for it. But here you have to do more of the collaboration work. Start to communicate with other communities and let them get interested of what you do and get them to know your program.
I know we're kind of out of time, but what you said is so important, I think, because like beyond just, I mean, you've touched on it so much, it's about community building, about belonging, but a lot of our work is like just beyond, the music is just like a vehicle for this collective healing. Like it's just about all this grief with displacement and diaspora and colonization, all the things that we're dealing with are actually just all coming out when we come together for these cross-cultural things. So there has to be this real, we have this big responsibility when we run stuff, and I think that's what we feel, and that's why we're still doing it. But yeah, it's about kind of tending to those really personal, like interpersonal things.
Yeah, and I noticed one thing when you think about a big programming organization, like for example Luminato or Stratford Summer Festivals, I think they want to see what you do and how much you wait. This is what I felt, and before that they wouldn't communicate with you and they don't look at you or ask you to come and do some programming with them. So I felt this is one thing that we have to do, is to showcase how much strong we are, how much we can attract, how many people we can attract. So this a little bit put pressure on you in order to make as much good effort and good results, so people, they can see what you do, because there's a big diversity here. Many people are doing a lot of art, so why they would look at you in particular, right? And yeah, so there's a lot of effort there, and music is exactly a vehicle, and you can deliver a human message, a political message, a personal message. There is a lot to do there.
There's one dude in the city who non-stop 24/7 keeps on inspiring me every day. 6 or 5 years ago, I was just a university student, and then I was walking down at Queen West, and I saw La Palette, massive, beautiful windows, killer bar, and I go to the bar, I sit down, and I start arguing about a Hungarian language with this guy from South Africa. I'm like, what the fuck is going on? And then we have like the most beautiful conversation with each other, and then 2 days later I bring my resume and I say, what do I need to do to work here? And this guy's name is Shamez Amlani. He is the person who started Pedestrian Sundays. He's one of the people who helped out Fedora Upside Down community. Lemon Bucket Orchestra started their career on top of his bar at La Palette. He's also one of the people who started blackout anniversary parties every single year that take place in the city. So for him, community is so important. And for him, like I feel like his main goal in life is to have like a dance revolution. And for him, every single time there is some kind of a party, but like a glorious and beautiful party where people like sweat, kiss, drink, and like hug each other like on the dance floor. It's like the most beautiful thing that can be happening in life, and he's like my number one. Every single day I wake up, and that's the kind of the thing that I want to continue doing. Is just to bring people together, make people feel at home, and yeah. He's super cool. Super cool. Go to La Palette, support him. Well, come here because he's one of the owners of this place. Super cool guy.
Ordering those copies in this.
Yeah.
Any questions from or comments from anybody in the audience at all before we move on?
I have.
Yeah.
Hi, thanks everybody. This is wonderful. My name is Lanny Milstein. I'm the director of producing at TO Live, which is the agency of the city that stewards and programs Meridian Hall, St. Lawrence Center, and Meridian Art Center. And I just wanted to make sure, because the conversation around space is like so key and so important for everybody. And I don't know if you know, but the St. Lawrence Center for the Arts is under audit, essentially. It's up for it needs a whole bunch of renovations, like millions of dollars, just to become accessible. So we're like, you know what? Maybe we don't need another proscenium arch soft cedar in the city. Let's talk about what the city needs and the spaces that artists need. And maybe this needs to be completely reimagined. And so they're now undertaking the process, and the project is called STLC Next. I think the website's stlcnext.org. But I encourage everybody in this room to check out the website. They're looking for community consultation because nobody can tell us what artists need in terms of space than artists. So please give your input, like get in there, get involved, because they're asking for it. So now is the time, and like we all know, there's plenty of living arts centers, Meridian Arts Center, many of those, but it's clear, like we need different kinds of spaces. So I encourage you all to check it out and participate.
Thank you.
Thanks.
No, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I think we all wrote that down, or we're going to come see you probably. Like it's starting. So I guess with that, thank you to Pratishta,
Thank you.
Bhushan, Rafa, and Misha, and Katie. Thanks, y'all. That was awesome.
Thanks. That's a good cue, eh?
Thank you, everyone. We have one more panel, 15 minutes. We're going to do a quick flip over, just do another round.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Problem.
So early. And thank you for.
Oh, thank you so much. With
Are y'all sticking around for this?
yes, we did. Yeah. We did many times. And, actually, I was part of the survey that they sent. So they sent a survey about the programming, and I think we responded to that.
Were you like, was it like a rental or was it a
Rental.
program?
Yeah. We try to make it a consistent programming.
We actually need a space like this.
kicks. Enjoy the next 30 minutes of uninterrupted listening.
Consciousness through music, away. Consciousness through music. Yeah. And awareness through music. All of my thugs, all of my girls come to go and take like we sparking. All of my thugs, all of my girls come to go and take like we sparking. Shine it for the microphone, do not say we going to spark it, start it. Yes, we in a parking lot, a parking live from across the Atlantic. DJ Quantic, up the sun boy and the dance floor frantic. You maybe can't understand it. Ever since Quantic landed, electricity is granted. So you better dip on it. Yep, you better dip on it, or better dip on it. You better dip on it, or better dip on it. Dip on it, or better dip on it. Dip on it. This day and age, it's a serious time. Here and if you better see and blind. To the park after dark when you walk low behind. To avoid being the next victim of a crime. Society of today, savage and benign. A joke that make we kill your for less than a dime. A junk can do anything for a buckle of wine. And the most wicked animal that a mankind. So you better dip on it. Yeah, you better dip on it. You better dip on it. Yes, you got to dip on it. Session you dip on it. Brother, off it, dip on it. You off it, dip on it. Dip on it. Rain it a fall, but still got it off. Yes, the pot of coke, but before they turn off. Over in the east, them I call out them bluff. Well, now we are gonna see all rough from out of for the better. Photographer at the window, you know them dip on it. At the window, you know the paparazzi at the window. And taking pictures at the A1 selector. One thing well renowned, one thing small, yeah. When I better know even the A1 selector. Ain't no song me say on the better dip on it. On the better dip on it. On the better dip on it. Yep, you better dip on it. You better dip on it. On the better dip on it. On the better dip on it. You better dip on it. Consciousness to music. Awareness to music. This is how we use it. So we go improve things. Consciousness to them know them dip on it. Medellin them dip on it. London them dip on it. New York City dip on it. You know them dip on it. LA well them dip on it. Belize them dip on it. Dip on it. Guyana dip on it. Dip on it. Jamaica dip on it. Dip on it. Cuba them dip on it. Puerto Rico dip on it. You know them dip on it. Dominica them dip on it. Haiti them dip on it. Dip on it. Trinidad them dip on it. You know them dip on it. Guatemala dip on it. Panama you know them dip on it. Brazil them dip on it. Peru and Chile dip on it. Mexico dip on it. You know say Argentina dip on it. Beijing them dip on it. You know say Vietnam dip on it. Moscow them dip on it. You know say Pakistan dip on it. India them dip on it. You know say Iraq dip on it. Iran them dip on it. You know Afghanistan dip on it. Egypt them dip on it. You know Morocco dip on it. Zaire them dip on it. You know Nairobi dip on it. Tanzania dip on it. You know say Ghana dip on it. Zimbabwe dip on it. You know say Congo dip on it. Madagascar dip on it. You know say China dip on it. Quantic dip on it. You know say Weizmann dip on it. In dip on it. You know say B plus no him dip on it. J-Rock him dip on it. You know say JFX him dip on it. China them dip on it. You know say Quantic dip on it. Big Junkies dip on it. You know say that is dip on it. This is a Quantic production. That's the feedback. Here comes Ringo.
em português. Roderick. Ah, Hi. Exactly, yes. So that's oh, check this.
Después de 2 años sin verte, tierra mía, al fin yo regreso a tu suelo a visitar la fiesta de Santa Lucía, la que no tiene rival, la que se puede gozar por la noche y por el día. ¡Opa! ¡Ah! No dejo de recordar a Santa Lucía, por muy lejos que me encuentre de mi tierra. No dejo de recordar a Santa Lucía, patrona de la tierra mía, la que olvido cuando muera. Hay hasta quien me consuela, que es la buena madre mía. ¡Ja! eso el 13 de diciembre voy al Guamo, solo por visitar a Santa Lucía. Por eso el 13 de diciembre voy al Guamo, solo por visitar a Santa Lucía. Y grito con alegría, que viva nuestros paisanos, viva la fiesta del Guamo y la buena vieja mía.
Va subiendo la corriente con chinchorro y atarraya, la canoa de bareque para llegar a la playa. Va subiendo la corriente con chinchorro y atarraya, la canoa de bareque para llegar a la playa. Habla con la luna, habla con la playa. No tiene fortuna, solo su atarraya. El pecador habla con la luna, habla con la playa. No tiene fortuna, solo su atarraya. El pecador habla con la
Jew, this or that, as long as when you're exchanging, so you become something automatically without even being that. And sometimes there is people who are not, and they can be even more than those who are. You know, it's quite often in a couple, you know. Someone is a bit Jewish, someone is not, and the person who is not becomes more Jewish than the person who is. Yes. No, it's quite often in a couple, you know. Someone is not.
Uh-oh, can we fix that one? This one is flashing like crazy. Uh-oh, can we fix that one?
Say hi. Say hi, Colin.
Can we fix that one?
How are you?
Yeah, on screen so I can see what else.
Yes.
Alan just typed myself.
The cello mafia is there. They have the hats. Bandits. They found the hats. They're happy.
More, 4. The new cello quartet.
But the other one, Volok, is from where?
Ukraine.
You just arrived here?
No, he's been here 2 years, I think, yeah.
Alan, did you hear me?
It's feedback. That's normal. That's Eastern Europe.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you again for sticking around and for coming. As you can tell, we're a little late on the schedule. It's Beyond Nation. Eric is going to lead this conversation for us. We want to thank Canada Heritage Factor, Ashkenaz, for supporting this panel, and I'm going to let Eric get on with it.
I don't think Alan is hearing me. Oh, you are? Okay, good. Excellent. Then maybe this is good as a light.
Berlin is with us.
Okay.
That's great.
This is killing you. Welcome, everybody. I guess there's no audio, so we should speak very loud.
Yes.
I'm Eric Stein, I'm the artistic director of the Ashkenaz Festival, and this panel is called Beyond Nation, looking at Jews and Roma in European music. This is better than the other one.
No, three in the same time.
I'm just going to start by reading the description of the panel, just to get everybody's head in the right frame here. For centuries, the Jewish and Romani people have played a unique and indispensable role in creating and transmitting European musical culture, including their own distinguished traditions. Yet, as minority communities in multiple nations, their centrality in European musical culture is often overlooked or even omitted, particularly when those musical traditions are defined by nationality alone. Complex histories scarred by segregation, persecution, and genocide underscore the otherness of Jews and Roma people in the European context and complicate understanding their critical role in East European musical life. As Block seeks to promote musical exchange between North America and Eastern Europe, how are Jewish and Romani musicians and musical styles to be considered? What challenges and opportunities exist to provide these communities the representation they so richly deserve? We are joined today by an esteemed group of guests. On my far left is Brenna McCrimmon. Brenna is a Canadian folk singer from Toronto. Sure, give it up for Brenna. Brenna has been performing, studying, and teaching Balkan and Turkish music since the late 1980s. She spent extended stretches of time living, studying, and working in Turkey with such traditional musicians as accordionist Mumar Ketenkoglu and the late Rom clarinet maestro Selim Sesler. Not a strict traditionalist, she has also frequently collaborated with Baba Zula, a Turkish psychedelic folk art rock band. She has toured widely in Canada, the US, and Europe, and has released her own recordings to critical acclaim. She's also performing later today with her group Turquoise, so stick around for that. And next to her between us is Sergio Popa, originally from Chisinau, Moldova. Yeah. Sergio, from a young age, studied traditional folk and Roma music with his father, Jan Popa, himself a well-recognized Romani accordionist. Over many years of playing alongside his father at weddings, he also became familiar with Jewish, Turkish, Russian, Serbian, and Bulgarian styles. After studying at the Conservatory of Moldova, and moving to Montreal in 2002, Sergio immersed himself in Middle Eastern, North African jazz and Latin traditions, developing a remarkable ability to switch and blend seamlessly the different styles. He has performed with many of the great names in Eastern European and Balkan music, such as Dan Armenyanka, Carmen Pikuliatsa, Fenfer Chokalia, Vadim Kolpakov, and Petar Relchev. He's performing today with his newest project, Romada. And finally, joining us from Berlin, Germany on screen, Alan Byrne, Dr. Alan Byrne, I should say. And finally, joining us, Alan is a giant, a major pioneer of the klezmer revival over the last 40 or 50 years. He's a leading accordionist, pianist, composer, educator, curator, and cultural activist. He's originally from Bloomington, Indiana. Like I said, he's lived in Berlin for, I think, over 30 years. He's the leader of such influential ensembles as Brave Old World, Zemmer Ensemble, and the Other Europeans, and has also performed with Itzhak Perlman, the Klezmatics, Andy Statman, and many others. He is founding director of Yiddish Summer Weimar, one of the most ambitious and important festivals of Jewish music anywhere in the world. He's a renowned educator and has inspired several generations of students in Weimar and at festivals and conservatories throughout the world. That's Alan Byrne. Make him feel welcome. So, before we dive into the deeper part of the questions that I want to ask, I want to set up sort of a historical frame, and maybe Sergio, you can start off, to just really tell us, convey the significance, the centrality of the Roma people in European musical life, what that looks like, what that has looked like over time.
Over the hundreds of years, I would say the Roma community added quite a lot to the world. Addition, they did quite a lot in different styles of music. Doesn't matter whatever place they were born, they would adapt locally, lend the style, but always play in their own way. And you always could track down that they come from some another parts because of their they had a code, and you always could track down by a second beat, which had the second beat was stronger than the first beat. So whatever folk of music around the world they would play, they would have that touch of theirs. And they were also quite often they could be blended in the society, and because of their color of the skin, quite often they would say that they are not Roma, but they would say, I don't know, Bulgarian, I'm Gagauz, I'm Turkish, I'm whatever, but just to hide the background. And also quite often in different countries, they split in few categories. One who come from a family where they would play academic music, because the parents always wanted to put the kids to integrate and sort of to forget about their background, but it's hard to hide it because this is what happened to me until the age of 11, 12. My father wanted to do all the best to sort of to integrate as much as possible, which I did. But then by the age of 13, 12, 13, I got into the more in the clan, sort of outside the city, in the villages, and the DNA kicked in. And I come home and they say I'm something else, and my father said no. Of course, you know, I had a bit of friction, but this was just a quick, example of that. And when I was saying about two categories, some of them they were learning the academic music, like classical music or café concert. In Europe, café concert it means waltzes, tangos from 1900, 1800, all of that. So by playing that, they would think that they play for the queen, for the king, for the politicians, for the lawyers, for all of that part of the society. And when they would play traditional music, it'd be more like village style. So they had city and they had village, which is in North America, it's opposite. They say if you could live outside the big city, this is great, because it's, you get peace of mind and less traffic and all of that. So Roma community added quite a lot to different styles of music, but including with the Jewish community, because if I give a good example, and Alan knows this example. Hi, by the way, Alan. In north of Moldova, they had villages where the Roma musicians would speak Yiddish because they would play quite often for the Jewish events, and also the music got adapted, so you could see the mix of fewer styles of music. And quite often, when that music arrives in klezmer or in Roma styles, everyone sort of tries to slice it, to split it. This is this style, that style, but in the end, it's really a mixture of few cultures together, like Roma, Jewish. Then you have Ukrainians, Russians, Gagauz, Bulgarians. In Moldova, you have all of that. So I would say that the Roma musicians and the Jewish musicians in Bessarabia and Moldova, if I talk about the place where I come, they added quite a lot to the local folk music.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Alan to chime in here. Oh, that's very interesting. You can look at a picture of himself on screen. I'll give you that look. Alan, if you could give us a little overview about the significance, particularly of the Jewish community, of Jewish musicians in European musical culture over centuries, I would say. Alan,
Okay, do you hear me?
Yep.
Good. There's quite a lot of feedback coming from somewhere. I have headphones on, so it shouldn't be from here. Okay, that's interesting. I'm hearing myself back again. Good. There's quite a lot of feedback coming from somewhere. I have headphones on, so it shouldn't be. I hear myself about 10 seconds after I've spoken. Myself back again. I hear myself about 10 seconds after I've spoken. I wonder what we can do about that. I can just turn off. I'll just speak and I won't listen to myself while I'm talking. I should be able to do that. Let's see. I hear myself about 10 seconds after I wonder what we can do about that. Okay, so first thing, can you still hear me? While I'm talking. Okay, cool. Let's see. First thing is that I'm not primarily a musicologist or a historian. I've learned an enormous amount over the years through Yiddish Summer by inviting people like Zev Feldman and Michael Alpert and others, Judith Frigazi, who really are primarily historians. And actually, I'll just mention that I think that it's very, very important for the music community that people with different musical expertises work together and complement each other. Some people use the term historically informed musical practice or performance practice. There's some problems with that term, but I like the basic idea of it. Brilliant colleagues. So that said, what I will say is that we have to probably distinguish a little bit about the role of klezmer musicians in places like Galicia versus in Bessarabia, Moldova, Romania, because my understanding from Zev Feldman in particular is that Jewish life in general was much more regulated in Galicia, and also the rules of being a klezmer musician, who can be one.
I think what he was starting to talk about was the role of professional Jewish, klezmer musicians, professional classical in many cases, these musicians were not just responsible for transmitting their own traditions, but those of the nations where they were living. Russia, Romania, Moldova, Hungary, Poland. This professional class of musicians played a really critical role moving between and among communities. And in some cases, you would go to a town and say, you'd be directed to a Rome, vice versa, depending on the population base. The Jews in Roma really had a very, very central role, which then begs the question of context here when we think about the history of these two communities. In the case of the Jews, essentially so for me, when Mark was talking to me about this and started telling me what he was programming, I was really excited. It sounded great. But the first thing that jumped out to me was that he didn't have any Jewish or Roman musicians on the program. And it was early in his planning. Maybe he would have gotten to it. But I pointed it out right away, and I said, why don't we get involved and Ashkenaz support that? So that's kind of how we've gotten to this point. And even, the name of the Slavic music meet, the name automatically leaves out the Jews and the Roma, despite the fact that these populations are so central in Eastern European musical culture. So thinking about that question and the purpose of the conference component here is, as I understand it from Mark's intent, is to facilitate trade, facilitate cultural exportation between countries in Eastern Europe, between Canada, back and forth. How do the Jews and the Roma fit into that? That's the big question that we're trying to answer. Do we know if Alan is still with us? Anybody? He is, so he's listening? Okay. Pardon me? Oh, there he is. Okay, good. Okay, good. Good to see that he's at least there. So I wanted to ask, I hope we can get some audio out of Alan, because I want him to tell us about a project that he created, I think about 10 or 12 years ago, called The Other Europeans. And the concept of otherness, I think, is actually critical for us to all think about in the context of this question. And Alan can do a far greater job than me, technology permitting, in talking about what The Other Europeans was about and how it really, for me, very much frames my actual understanding of thinking about this question of how do the Jews and the Roma fit into European music. So Alan, let's go for it again, and let's see if we can get a clean signal out of you.
Okay, do you hear me?
European music. So echoey, but we can hear you. Let's see if we can get a clean signal out of you.
Okay, there's the echoes. Okay, there's the echoes. Do you hear me? Maybe someone can put a message into chat if you can hear me. Do you hear me? Maybe someone can put a message into chat if you can hear me. It's crazy. Do you hear me? Maybe someone can put a message into chat if you can hear me. It's crazy. Do you hear me? Let's see if this is any better. 1, 2, 3. Let's see if this is any better. I don't know if you hear me, but I'm getting an infinite echo loop here, which makes it impossible for me to think for more than 4 words at a time.
If you turn off your speakers and just speak.
Impossible for me to think for more than 4 words. Okay,
Or
I'll
put some
turn off my
headphones on.
speakers and I'll just speak, and I'll hope that that's the weirdest form of communication in the world. But let's give it a try. Let's see what happens. That's the weirdest form of communication in the world. I feel like I'm looking at myself, and I'm speaking without any sense of there being anyone listening to me, but okay, that's how it is. I'll give it a try. So, what the other Europeans actually was an idea that I had back in 2007. It came from visiting, my speakers are off now. Can you still hear me? It came from visiting, somebody can put into chat whether you can hear me. Microphone should be on. Sorry to be making life difficult. Microphone should be on. Sorry to be making life difficult. Okay, cool. So I had been to a number of, let's call it world music, because that was what they called it, conferences, and showcases. And I found most of the time that the narrative that was being told about Jewish musicians and also about Roma musicians was very, very different from narratives that I understood. And it felt to me like those narratives were there primarily to serve commercial purposes and were dealing with false understandings and false ideas. And I was just very curious at the beginning of this project, what do Jewish musicians, or let's say klezmer musicians and Lautari musicians, have to say about themselves? What if we could control that narrative? And this was shortly after the European Union was formed, and there was an interesting debate going on at that time about what is it to be European, with the understanding that one knows what it is to be French or German or British or Belgian. Those are all sort of national identities.
Okay, well, I'll continue. I know enough about the other Europeans that I can also talk about the other Europeans. The other Europeans, and Alan is far more eloquent and brilliant in talking about this and conceiving it in the first place. But the goal of the project was to highlight that significance of those two communities in European music culture, and particularly the ways they interacted with each other, the ways their communities overlapped, the way their communities diverged. The thing that was interesting to me about that project, and it stuck out for me at the time, is that this was, I guess he said 2007, so almost 15 years ago that the project started. It was in the earlier days of the European Union, when the European Union was really starting to extend its hegemony across Europe, I suppose. And the European Union funded that project quite robustly. To me, it was sort of an indication of a new sort of political perspective on the Jewish and the Roma people, but one that could only be offered by an overarching body like the EU. What I've found as a cultural programmer with the Ashkenaz Festival and seeking to work with different countries and artists from different countries, usually interfacing with embassies or cultural trade organizations, that the official agencies for cultural trade representing countries like Poland, Ukraine, Russia, Hungary, they're not inclined to put forth musicians from the Jewish and Roma communities. And I've actually had specific instances where I've gone to them with proposals of I would like to bring this artist or that artist. And there were sort of different reasons in different cases, and I don't want to single out any particular countries, but in some cases it was there was sort of this awkward conversation where they would kind of come up with kind of a phony excuse for why they wouldn't support that artist, when it was kind of clear to me, like, well, this isn't, they would be pitching me on something that was, you know, purely of that nationality, that ethnicity. And it was very transparent to me that there was a lack of recognition, a lack of acceptance of Jewish and Roma musicians as being representative of those nations' musical culture. So in the context of a conference like this, how do we change that conversation? How do we get people that are working on musical trade and exportation to embrace these communities that have been so central to music making? Brenna, let's get you involved in the conversation. You don't have to necessarily answer that question right away, but maybe you can speak, we spoke about this before, you can speak to a little bit what you witnessed in terms of how Roma musical communities were treated in places like Turkey where you've spent a lot of time.
So one of the things that we have to be careful about is great generalizations. I think there are so many pockets, and Sergio also pointed out that there are families that have really made efforts to get their kids, you know, into a professional level of schooling and education, and then there's other families that go through a more traditional a pathway. But I have certainly seen over and over again, I'm going to get mad, how a glass ceiling is placed on them, that certain kinds of prejudices are really, really, really hard to overcome. And gosh, it's not my tears, but I was recording in 1998 in a nice studio, and I had my musicians there, and we were finishing up for the day, and the studio owner came in, I'm gonna get mad, and he said to the engineer, count the microphones before they leave. And I got mad. I was like, and I understand Turkish, I understood what was being said, and I just looked at the engineer, who was a friend of mine, and I said, did he just say what I think he just said? And the engineer kind of shrugged, and I said, well, you know, how dare he say that? And the lead musician, Selim Sesler, was a real gentleman. If one of his musicians did anything untoward in the studio, he would have had their necks. Like, that wasn't what he was proud of. That wasn't the way he behaved in the world. And to have that be the automatic default of the studio owner, to come in and say, count the microphones before these guys leave the studio. And that kind of attitude would happen over and over and over again. That just sort of, you know, we can't, for whatever reason, trust them. And I found that appalling. And what can you do but just say, don't count the microphones? Like, you know, don't. They're there. Like, how dare you? Like, that's really a horrible situation. And one thing also that Sergio alluded to, which has changed somewhat over the years, but a lot of really prominent performers don't advertise their Roma-ness. They kind of, you know, submerge it. And I've been in situations where more formally trained classical musicians will sort of, oh yeah, look, their Roma is coming out. And they're saying it in a slightly snide way. They're not saying it in what a beautiful thing it is. They're sort of saying it in a, this is not as valuable as this other more cultured thing. And in those kind of situations, I just sort of look there like a dummy and say, what do you mean? You know, tell me, you know, what do you mean? Why is that not a wonderful thing? It's energetic. It speaks to people. So why is this not a positive thing? So there's a very subtle prejudice that goes on, and it's really, really hard to overcome. And yet, at the same time, you want to go out and have a party, there's going to be, you know, the best place to do that is going to be places where there's Roma musicians who are, you know, putting their heart and soul and joy and spirit for everybody to enjoy. So it's a very and you know, depending on where you are and what time it is, things change. I'm very interested in seeing how the careers of people like Husnu Shananderji, who's a great clarinet. Yeah. He said something very interesting to me, and this might tie in a little bit with the export thing, but we were driving around stuck on the bridge in Istanbul, which means we were sitting in a car for 2 hours. And we were just talking about stuff, and I was asking him how things were going, and all the touring that he was doing. And he said, well, when I tour outside of Turkey, I'm presenting a more traditional sort of, you know, I'll use the word gypsy idea because that's what we can sell outside of Turkey. But he said, inside Turkey, I'm much more interested in doing this jazz new style. And it's very funny that, you know, what he's most excited about is, and the thing that actually where he's probably really pushing boundaries is not the one that's being picked up and asked to be exported. So there's this weird thing that we do quite unconsciously as outsiders or as importers or as consumers in this, is that we're actually defining them in a kind of a way by saying, we want that, but you know, you may be doing something else, but we kind of want that. And I don't have an easy answer with that, because I know that there's all kinds of formulas about how things get picked up and sold and marketed and whatnot. But there is, you know, sometimes I think we're not totally listening to where they're at and where they're going. We're compartmentalizing them at the same time that we're trying to bring them out. So don't say I have an easy answer for that, but yeah. I
Thanks.
probably talked in huge circles.
No, that's a good perspective. Sergio, maybe you can pick that up a little bit and talk about any of your personal experiences, particularly in Europe, where being Roma was something where you noticed that there was a prejudice.
I think this goes back so many hundreds of years, and I try to understand both sides. I don't support the racism and the prejudice, but it's just because since it went for so long in the history for hundreds of years, the people in Eastern Europe, they say something which their parents told them, which their grandparents told them to say automatically, and when you're with them on the table, say, well, they talk about something where funny, something that doesn't make sense, and then they say, I'm Jew. I say, oh, I didn't know about that, so, or I'm Roma. So they hate someone without even not knowing how they look or what they do. So I think it's really an old information which has to be erased, and I still have faith in the society that will make a change, especially all of us from here, and passing it to the rest of the world with the music, with the art, with the love back. And yes, it's important to name and to point the situations, what happens, but also I feel that there is a small change now. They realize that. They say, you know, you look funny or you're weird, but maybe it's not so bad as I was thinking. So once they know you, people change and they adapt to that. But music-wise, it's very interesting what you were saying about Husnu and about many musicians, because they have a stamp. So when you go somewhere, since you have a stamp, you have to act of that stamp. And they say, oh, you're Roma or you're Jew, so you should do this, you should do that. And finally you're right there and you play completely another style of music. For example, me playing for Moroccan community in Montreal, they're so huge, Moroccan Jewish community. Before I used to do lots of Ashkenaz, now still a bit of Ashkenaz, but lots of Sephardic. I learned playing with the music for so many years with them. I learned the entire services, what the rabbi is saying, what the cantor is singing. So if some of them is missing, I could do the full ceremony, Jewish ceremony, which is weird, because me coming from another mountain and they coming from another mountain. So this it shows how we can integrate and mix with each other. And one important subject I wanted to say that sometimes you hear in Eastern European countries, non-Roma musicians, non-Jewish musicians saying, I'm, let's say in case of Moldova, I'm Moldavian, I'm from Moldova, and it's not only Roma musicians can play music, us we can do that too, and look, I did it, which is great. Music is for everyone. But then, if you just rewind the videotape behind and it goes many years back, they grew up in a Roma house. So when they were 10, 11, 12 years old, in the Roma families, the Papa was teaching on violin or cymbalum, the other kids, and they sort of learn something subconsciously, and that's interesting how you still might not like something or hate sometimes, but you interpret that music. So in the end of the day, what I want to say with that, I still think that there is hope for change, and society could do sometimes a quick turn that you would never expect. We just, our biggest power, more than any money on the planet and more than any politician and anything, that we have the tool in our hand, which is music and art, and we can, yes.
Nice.
Yes. And we can pass it, the word of peace and of understanding each other. So that's a huge tool we have in our hands, and the responsibility too. So we have to pass it wisely too. We have to do the research on our own, and too, like in musicology, in society, in history, and all of that. And with this tool, we can.
Right.
Yeah.
I want to refer to something that came up when Brenna was speaking. The term gypsy.
Oh yeah.
Gypsy music. This is a really problematic term. What I notice about it, it's become, when I say the word now, I sort of feel the same way, saying other terrible pejorative words. But I do notice that in Roma communities, and from a branding standpoint, Roma people are calling their own music gypsy music, or calling themselves gypsies. And I wonder to what extent that is a product of branding necessity to sell what you have, or if it's a way of reclaiming the language of oppression. Can you speak to that, either one of you?
Yeah, maybe you could start with that, yeah.
I think, yes, there are definitely Roma people who happily use the word gypsy. They're very comfortable with it. They like it as their identity. There are other people, and again, this is a population that is huge. It is spread out over a massive geography. So I think, again, it's really dangerous to try and say this applies to everyone. I think the consciousness of being Rome really didn't start until the 1970s with the International Romani Congress. So this is really it's a 50-year-old idea within a community that is really spread out and has varying degrees of access to education and whatever that would help them create this identity. That said, it's very interesting seeing people who go both ways, or they'll, when they're talking about themselves or amongst themselves, they refer to themselves as Roma, or Roman, or Romani, but they will identify themselves as gypsy outside just because they know that you will understand that, and the negative connotations come and go. It's really fluid and it's not easy. And I think that if you're going to work with a group of people, just ask them, how do you prefer to be called? Do you want to be called Roma or Roman? Do you want to be Romani? What is how do you identify yourself? And to keep working with them in that way. I think, because gypsy is a funny one. It's a funny one.
I still think that, for example, if you take the example of native people in Canada or African American people in States, and they call themselves, let's say, we would say black because it's black. They call it African American. They would call sometimes between themselves. They could say, like even in the slang, street slang, and some kind of shtetls, they would say nigger or something like that. That's their own choice, or their own. If they decided to call themselves between themselves, that's fine. But me as an outsider, I would not use that word. So I would use the because sometimes there is a musicians group. They say, well, if they call themselves like this, we can call them too. So I would say, if a certain group of people use a certain word between themselves, that's their personal thing. But me as an outsider, I still would use the word just to be, correct to that. And I don't know if, like, you wanted to add something on this. I saw you.
I'll be honest.
Yes.
This is La Kestrel.
It's been an honor to be here, and thank you for thinking of Roma and Jewish and klezmer music. Now, to make it very simple, we all know each other, and we're the guys. It's very uncomfortable for us to call gypsy, tzigane, which is means do not touch him, or whatever. Every time they need good music, they hire us, they make fun, they have the best of them, then after we're outside. But people like me, like Eric, like Sergio, great accomplished musician, Brana, which you've been in this genre of music and you know how we are treated, we're thinking about implementing a course, Roma jazz, the way how we got Latin jazz, Afro jazz, right? Now we're going to implement Roma. When we call ourselves Roma, we feel proud because we are Roma. I didn't say I'm Roma till in 2003 when I wrote the music for the screen for a movie we got the gold plaque of Chicago Television Music Awards for Julia Lovell. And she asked me, are you a Rom? I said, my name is a Greek and I have a Romanian citizen in Russia for where I come from. Because I was hiding. I feel, honestly, I feel uncomfortable. Now, today, I'm proud to be a Rom. And but we need to implement, and we need your help and everybody else to implement this thing, like a course, what I spoke to scholars like Salvador Ferreras and musicology and other people about Roma jazz, because in our music, when we come home, we never even have time to analyze our songs and our music. We have A, B, C, D. Was everything oral transmission? Now from that on we're going about what did Roma do? Roma did the greatest addition to all the music. Flamenco, classical, Bizet, Ravel, in Austro-Hungarian Empire when we talk about Gypsy Roma, that is called classical, cafe concert, all salon music. But because everybody saw Roma people playing, they say Gypsy music. Exactly how we see the Chinese people playing a different other music, and they say, I have enough experience myself and I face with my own heart and I feel it, the sorrow and the pain, which, as Sergio said, is in our tool, in music. But right now, our kids, our society, and with your help, which love our music, we can implement some courses, we can put something where people will know this is an identity, this is how things start, and when you move to France, jungle, gypsy jazz, which is jazz. You know, they use all the structure 2-5-1, everything from jazz. But to survive ourselves, Roma, we have to adapt to each country. Of course, we do have a chance to play our own thing, which we have a question. What is the original Roma music? With my own experience, I think I don't know. Because probably was before 2,000 years ago, before we became slaves and sold all over the world. Then, what we can say, yes, we add to any other genre of music, because to survive, we have to do the best to survive. And we add to classical music, to flamenco, to jazz, to Balkan music, to any other nationalities. And, you know, I have experience myself, as Brana said, when every time I deserve a 10, which is the highest grade in a musical school, I never deserve it. I deserve 7 or maximum 8. And the teacher said, "Lucky, don't worry. You know, some other people, they did like me and sympathize me, but this is some other people." Also, my father was a conductor, was very strong, but it's a long story, you know, to explain, but he was right, you know. I have situation when I was in a session with Roma musician and they told us, put him in a bag. Why? Because he got the color of the shoes. He's black like the color of the shoes. I said, okay. I was 14 years when I played the symphony, and one of my greatest friends was a great violin player, and this was happened in Galați when he gave an exam to enter in the high school of music, and they denied him because he was wrong. And you know, I think this is our time right now for help to start to implement, you know, to receive our respect, and what we are in the end. We are all one nation. We just want to live. And we don't want to be pushed down and have that fear and phobia. Like I go with my musician in Romania, I played in 2015 with Sam Shoiket, which is blonde and his Jewish background, and Rebecca and everybody else. And all the Romanian people saw the Roma people with the dresses and they said, we want to touch this. No, because it's Roma, no. And some said, sorry, what do you mean? I don't understand. We are human. Because here in Canada, we don't accept that bribing and saying about, oh, let them, whatever or something. I think, sorry about my mistakes in English, but we are all one nation. We love you guys. We need, with our tools, with the music and everything, to make this happen. And people say Roma don't know. We have Roma who reads music, who writes arrangements, who do things, lots of things. Thank you.
Thank you, Leke. Let me just pull us back to the point we were on there about the use of the word, I will use the word gypsy. I think that's part of the problem, actually, that word has become a signifier for lots of things, some positive and a lot negative. And I think that the greater extent that Roma is substituted for the use of the word gypsy, I think is probably going to be effective in terms of changing this perception. And it's like I said, we call ourselves Roma, we feel proud. And I think that that term has also been used and abused by Western Europeans who, in large part, have exploited Eastern European Roma musicians for their own commercial gain. There's lots of stories about the group Tarafta Hajduk, particularly. I've heard stories about the way that they were signed by I think a Belgian record label. There's a number of record labels in Western Europe that sort of specialize in the exotic of the East. And on the one hand, there's a positive component that they are actually putting this music out there, but on the other hand, they're trading on stereotypes in a lot of ways. And that's something that I would suggest is maybe part of the way that we move the needle on this problem. There's also the question of cultural appropriation and representation. Brent and I had a pretty interesting conversation about it before that I don't think we're going to be up to because I don't know, we have only a little bit of time left. One of the things that I found in my experiences trying to bring artists from Europe, from some of these countries, is when they would have their preferred lists of the artists that they would prefer that I consider hiring, they would actually have non-Jewish or non-Roma musicians as the representative of those styles. I would say that that is not an automatic dismiss. I think it's about the depth to which particular musicians delve into whatever they're playing. And I think Jews and Roma communities, in a way, they themselves have been appropriators for many years in the most positive sense, that they're transmitting culture from the nations where they're living and from each other. But when you have a situation where a country is trying to encourage you to buy one of their artists who is sort of a fake representation of that community or that musical style, that's part of the problem as well. And I don't know how we change that. I think that I'll flip it around here, and I'm very conscious about the time because Michael's giving me the stares. But I think that in Canada, we actually have something that we can learn from in terms of the way the Indigenous music community has been elevated in our midst, and there's certainly lots of work to be done in that regard. But to the extent that the Indigenous community for decades, centuries, was considered second class, where I would say over the last 20, 30 years, there's been quite a flip. And even just in the last few years, a really intense, renewed energy around elevating the music of Indigenous communities as representative of Canada. That's the closest thing we can say is actually Canadian music. In a way, there's, I think, some analogous components when we think about Jewish and Roma musicians. Is there anything you guys want to comment on that, Brenna? No? I've stumped you?
Well, no, without going into a big, long...
Yeah. We need to keep it brief. Yeah.
Mindful of the time. I think what you were saying about the, being bearers of tradition and being bearers of multiple traditions, and Sergio alluded to that Roma musicians, their job is to learn and know a lot about whoever they're playing for. And and yet when they're not, when that respect isn't given back to them, when big touring packages are put together and leaving them out is really, it's frustrating. And I don't know, I mean, I think as individuals, what we can do, and you will know this a little bit more, is that you know, we have to try and bring people over without those state sponsors. We have to kind of go around them and figure out who can be their agents and
Right.
work with people that can.
Something interesting that I've noticed in reference to what I was just saying about the indigenous aspect, I'll compare it to Germany. Germany has probably had the most intense and sincere reckoning with its past of European countries vis-a-vis the Jews. And there actually is quite a robust state-sanctioned support for Jewish music and Jewish communities in Germany. Other countries are more problematic in Europe, but to me, I see a parallel between, and the historical circumstances are, there's lots of similarities, there's lots of differences, but there's a parallel that I think is potentially instructive for us in thinking about how those cultures should be represented and can be represented. The other thing I'll say is that the Jewish question versus the Roma question is a little bit different in the European context because the Jews have mostly been eliminated. And the fact that they're not still there on the ground in a major way has made it easier in some places to actually start to prop up those cultures in some way. The Roma communities are still subject to extreme discrimination and persecution, segregation, particularly in places where their numbers are larger. Hungary, Czech Republic, these are places where there are significant things that we've all heard about in the news about how Roma communities are treated. So I guess since we do need to wrap up soon, trying to just, I don't think we're going to answer too many more questions today, but maybe we can ask more questions and think about these questions. And one other point I wanted to make that creates problematic perceptions about Jewish music being European music is the very thorny question of politics and nations. It's beyond nations, so I'll say it. Israel is a complication when it comes to thinking about Jewish music. Perception of what Jewish music, not all Jewish music is Israeli, not all Jewish music is Eastern European. I've had those experiences I was talking about before where I've had cultural export offices that turned me down for something. In one case, it was a country where there was an Israeli expat who had been living in that country for 20 plus years, was a citizen, was married to a woman who was of that ethnicity from that country, and was working with an ensemble of all musicians from that country. And this country's cultural representative found every which way to turn me down. And this music was fantastic music. There was no quality issue, but it was really, really obvious that it was a political issue, and it was because of the artist's roots as being Israeli. So that's something that I would urge anybody to think about here, and particularly those who book music, that, you know, there's a difference between Jewish music and Israeli music, and it sort of ties into this question of nation.